Welcome to the show. It is IB Nation Sports Talk. I am up and rolling, a little bit solo for right now today. Jesse is going to be along in a little bit. He'll be with me for some rapid fire. We're going to be talking to the Ohio State beat writer Chase Brown coming up here in a minute. And I had a couple comments that I was going to show up on the screen, but something happened in the back end here to my ability to put the stuff up on the screen. Well, thank you, Father Dave. It is good to see you. I've just got some issues in my chat function here on the YouTube page, but other than that, things appear to be working very well. Here we go. Now I've got it. I cleared it out, and Tommy was he was a little upset. He's like, "I get it. Sean interviewed not Archer. I'm not exactly sure who Archer is. It's Chase Brown that I interviewed, but he says, do we really have to look at an Ohio State quarterback? That is what is up in terms of the show card for today. We've got an Ohio State quarterback up there. Unfortunately, yes, you do. And as Father David said, just imagine he's about to throw an interception to Ben Morrison. It is just that simple. By the way, Tommy, congratulations to your son. He said his boy in the 4x8 relay today set a school record. So congratulations to him. Congratulations to you. Glad to hear that things are going well there. Well, I'm not going to waste any time. Smash the like button, subscribe, rate, and review, and all that good stuff. Again, Jesse is going to be along with me after this Ohio State interview. So we will do that first. We're going to talk a little Buckeyes right now, and then after that, Jesse will be here for some rapid fire as well. So that's what's coming up on today's show. Let's waste no time. We're going to talk some Lorenzo Styles, Javontae Jean-Baptiste. We're going to talk the Ohio State quarterback competition in the spring and a whole lot more with Chase Brown. Well, let's just get going with Chase Brown. We'll talk a little Ohio State. He's, of course, 11warriors.com. Chase, appreciate you joining us here today.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I can't remember when the last time we spoke was. A little bit before that game last year, but
yeah, I guess August sometime maybe, right?
Yeah, we started the clock a little bit earlier this time. We're getting some good off-season content here.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, it's like it's this time of year. I'm sure you guys are in the same boat as we are, trying to find some different angles to cover that we haven't already covered,
Right.
So, well, let's start with Lorenzo Styles. It's been a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, since he left Notre Dame and ultimately decided to join his brother Sonny there in Columbus at Ohio State. How did that move the needle there in Buckeye land?
I think a lot of people are excited to have him. Not quite sure where he may fit quite yet. As you know, he started at wide receiver for Notre Dame, and although he was initially recruited to play cornerback at Ohio State or play, that's where they wanted to put him if he were going to commit there. He hasn't played the position in a couple of years, so it's not as simple as a plug and play quite yet. Of course, Jim Knowles' defense is a little bit more complex than the average defensive coordinators may be, so it could take some time for him to get settled into the system. But he's athletic. He has great football IQ from what we've seen on tape. So I imagine that he'll probably get his feet wet a little bit on special teams and then find his way maybe into the 3 deep, maybe move into the 2 deep, depending on how his performances look early in the year.
And it was like, from our perspective, it's like we didn't get to see a whole lot of practice during the spring, but the second one we were at, all of a sudden we were a few sessions in and it's like, hold it. Is that Lorenzo Styles over there with the cornerbacks? Is he playing?
Yeah.
Then he got a live rep, where he's actually defending his receiver. And it's like, wow, the guy's got pretty good form. And then they let us talk to him a couple days later. And, it turned into this big sort of flurry. And then within a couple days after we talked to him, he's transferring back. It is kind of odd, like you mentioned, that I think part of the reason he came to Notre Dame was to play receiver rather than defensive back. and he was going to get an opportunity to play defensive back here, and that's essentially exactly, he's kind of right back where he started from a recruiting aspect, like you said, because that's how Ohio State recruited him.
Yeah, we haven't spoken to him yet since that move. I wouldn't imagine that there's any ill will between him and the Notre Dame program. I think it just kind of became a thing where, Ohio State initially wanted him as a corner. I think the reason that he didn't end up going to Ohio State was because he wanted to be a receiver. And that's what Notre Dame wanted him as. And I think that Notre Dame was probably going to be willing to let him make that switch. But then you kind of have an identity thing where, okay, I came to this school to be a wide receiver. If I transition to cornerback, do I find my place? If I don't, do I get lost in the mix? Ohio State has had a few instances, position changes where that's worked, like Steel Chambers switched from running back to linebacker. Chip Trayanum was a running back, then a linebacker, and then back to running back, and now has found his home there. So it's worked here in Columbus. I'm not so sure how often that happens over in South Bend, but I think maybe there's a idea for Lorenzo that he is able to go to a place that initially wanted him to play a specific role. Now he's with this team in this program. Maybe he sees the writing on the wall. He sees where they want him to be, and he's going to capture it here. So yeah, I don't think there's anything really that was inhibiting him from being a defensive back in Notre Dame, but maybe just feels more comfortable here in Columbus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know they added a couple other, Ohio State added a couple other transfers as well. And it sounds like, are they over the scholarship limit right now? / I've heard he might have to be essentially a walk-on this year without a scholarship. Have you heard anything on that?
Yeah, we're still trying to figure out exactly what that will look like because we've been doing the same sort of math. Okay, they have more scholarship players than the limit of 85. Or they're going to be players that transfer out, or they're going to be players who take a medical red shirt that drop that number, or will Lorenzo Styles or one of these incoming transfers have to start as a walk-on until one of those spots open up? There's definitely a lot of confusion around that here in Columbus, and we're kind of trying to wonder, we're trying to piece together the puzzle a little bit. And we'd love to be a fly on the wall in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center to know what those conversations look like.
Absolutely. So the other end of the spectrum is Notre Dame, of course, got Javontae Jean-Baptiste from Ohio State. He transferred over at semester as a grad transfer. He was a 4-star recruit out of high school, didn't necessarily have a lot of production, I guess, in his time there. What kind of expectations maybe were on Jean-Baptiste when he got to Ohio State out of high school?
I think Ohio State viewed him as a depth piece initially, and then he kind of butted into a player that was starting to really capitalize on the athleticism and the strength that he gained in Mickey Maratti's program, and just working under the tutelage of Larry Johnson. So he kind of became a fine piece opposite of Zach Harrison on the defensive line. In a very similar instance or similar kind of story with Lorenzo Styles, I think Baptiste probably just found himself in a position where he has younger guys that were below him that Ohio State was excited about getting on the field. And I think it's probably one of those times where Ohio State's coaching staff had a difficult conversation with him and said, hey, look, we have JT Tuimoloau, we have Jack Sawyer. These guys were 2 top 5 overall recruits in their recruiting classes, depending on what service you look at. And we want to get them on the field. So if you stay here, you're going to play, but you're probably not going to play as much as you are familiar with or that you were accustomed to in years past.
Right.
So I believe it was probably one of those things. Again, too, looking at the scholarship numbers, Ohio State probably also had that in the back of their minds, too, when having that conversation. Needing to get that number lower to bring in new transfers. You don't necessarily want to keep a guy around that might not be able to have the amount of opportunities that he used to, limiting production that in an overall sense wasn't as great as maybe they were expecting.
Yeah. I mean, Notre Dame has kind of had some similar attrition this spring themselves. Was some of those conversations. Like I know fans can panic whatever when you start seeing some transfers, but I think as you can attest to, the more successful you are and the more highly you continue to recruit, the more you're going to have guys leave from time to time for the very reasons that you're talking about.
Yeah, Ohio State's transfer strategy has really taken a change, a 180 of sorts this offseason, where in years past, while the transfer portal was becoming a more popular route for the top programs to build their teams, to round out their rosters, Ohio State kind of took a backseat role. The player I always think of is Eli Ricks, the cornerback that was transferring from LSU. Ohio State was in on him, and then all of a sudden was out. Like in a matter of a couple of days, Ohio State was interested, and then they backed out. And it was later reported that they didn't want to disrupt the harmony of their room. Eli Ricks ends up at Alabama, and Ohio State keeps their guys. But then eventually, Legend Cavazos transfers to North Carolina. Ryan Watts transfers to Texas.
Right.
All those guys ended up leaving anyway, and Ohio State was left with nothing. And then the pass defense ends up being a weakness this past season, as it had been in years past. So I think Ohio State has kind of adopted the mentality of, okay, we want to keep our roster as peaceful as possible. We want to keep the guys in the locker room happy. I think they would like to recruit guys that eventually become starters. But if that's not the case, and if a position has need, then the transfer portal needs to be a place that they go to find talent. And so they've done that this offseason with Davison Igbinison of Ole Miss, with Tywone Malone of Ole Miss, and Jahad Carter from Syracuse, and then also Lorenzo Styles from Notre Dame.
Right. So I guess the biggest question, maybe I've buried this a little bit, but no more CJ Stroud. And obviously that means a new quarterback now for Ohio State. And I know Devin Brown missed the spring game. Sounded like Kyle McCord kind of had an up and down spring game. So when you look at that heading into the summer, is there a clear-cut front runner, or what's the status on the quarterback position right now?
Yeah, I think the mindset that most people have held to this point in the year has been that Kyle McCord has just a little bit of a head start on Devin Brown. McCord has been in the system for 2 years. He was CJ Stroud's primary backup for both of those years. And although Devin Brown arrived last year as a 4-star quarterback with plenty of talent, he didn't really get as many opportunities as McCord did in those backup scenarios. I believe he actually hasn't thrown a pass. If he has, it's only been 1 or 2. And I'm not sure if they were really the kinds of passes that are trademark ones. They were more so dink and duck kind of passes. If he did record those. But yeah, I think that McCord is in a position where he's a little bit ahead of Devin Brown. But as we watched in the spring, I don't necessarily know if McCord did anything that gave him the job outright. The practices that we watched, neither quarterback was particularly impressive. Within that, I would say McCord didn't do enough to take the job outright. But then also Devin Brown didn't do enough to really create much buzz around the idea that he would then take the job either. So I do think that there is still very much a competition that's alive. McCord's probably the front runner, but Brown has some work to do if he wants to take that away.
I mean, considering the track record they've got, the last 2 quarterbacks, Fields and Stroud, have both gone at the top of the NFL draft. I mean, is there any real concern there? Is there enough confidence because of the way they've developed guys coming out of that system that it's just a matter of time, things will be okay ultimately?
I think that idea is probably still true with Ohio State. The knock on Justin Fields and CJ Stroud in the draft process, even Dwayne Haskins too, was, Ohio State's receivers are always so wide open.
Right.
These quarterbacks never have to make a difficult throw. How good are these guys? I think that statement, that idea, is going to be the most true this year with McCord and with Brown. Like, I do think that Justin Fields and CJ Stroud were both extremely talented quarterbacks that made their wide receivers look as good, if not better, as they did for them.
Yeah.
But with McCord and Brown, they don't need to be excellent. They don't need to be elite. You have Marvin Harrison Jr., who could potentially be the number 1 overall pick in the draft.
Yeah.
That may be a stretch, but top 2, top 3, top 4, top 5. And Emeka Egbuka is right behind him. And then you also have a guy, Julian Fleming was the number 1 wide receiver recruit in the 2020 class. And then you have so much depth there. You have a great running back room with Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and Evan Pryor and Chip Trainum and Dallin Hayden. Like, there's so many names that are going to be surrounding these guys as talent, as skill position players, that they don't really need to be great for Ohio State to be successful this season. The real question, and I know you'll probably ask me about this, is can the offensive line protect them? That's going to be the number one thing for them. If they have protection and make those throws, then I think Ohio State will be fine.
Well, yeah, and obviously they lose their best offensive lineman in Paris Johnson to the draft, and it seems like after quarterback, is that the biggest question that they've got, is just, who's going to be able to, are they going to be able to protect the quarterback, what that's going to look like?
Absolutely. I would honestly put that as the number one question right now, because if Ohio State doesn't have a good offensive line, it doesn't matter if McCord or Brown is back there. They're going to be fighting for their lives every play. If they do have a good offensive line, then either McCord or Brown will succeed. It's just a matter of how well do each of those players mesh with the others around them. That chemistry, that leadership is what Ryan Day is really looking for out of those guys. How can they lead the offense? How can they show toughness? It's hard to do that when you're sitting on your butt at the end of every play. I mean, unless you're Joe Burrow and you're playing for the Cincinnati Bengals, there's not very many players in the world that can withstand constantly running around the backfield for their lives and making good throws. But yeah, Ohio State lost Paris Johnson Jr. They lost DeJuan Jones. The most surprising was losing Luke Whippler, the center, because that takes your returning offensive line room from 3 with Whippler, Donovan Jackson, and Matt Jones down to 2. So now you're working in 3 new offensive linemen at left tackle, at center, and at right tackle. And they're trying to figure out which guys will fit those molds, which guys will, in a similar way to McCord and Brown's competition, who's gonna show toughness, who's gonna show leadership, who's gonna step in front and really take control and take the reins of that job. They feel pretty good about Josh Simmons, the transfer from San Diego State that just came in. He'll probably compete for the right tackle job with Tegra Shabola. And then on the left tackle side, you have Josh Fryer competing with Zen Mahalski. So you're looking at those 2 spots as, who's ahead, who's not. Josh Simmons is new in the system, so maybe Shabola has a little bit of a head start, and Josh Fryer has been in the program for a couple of years longer than Mahalski. So you're just looking at these position battles, and you don't really know who's ahead right now, but they're definitely looking at that position room each and every day, hoping that the right 5 can come together.
I'm curious, you said earlier something about the practices that you were able to see in the spring. Like, we got 2 full practices, and then we got little 5-period snippets at the start of practice. What was your spring availability like in terms of practice?
Those 5 periods are great, aren't they? They stretch.
That's one way to put
it. You get to see them stretch for 5 minutes, and then you get to see them do their individual drills, and you never get to see any of the good stuff. I think a lot of people have the misperception, the fans, our readers, our listeners are like, oh, you get to go to practice, it must be awesome. But honestly, most of the time it's not that fun.
Right.
But the stuff that we did get to
tracking
see,
who's there and who's not there. That's the biggest sport of it.
We're sitting with our notebooks. We're like, oh, he's over there. He's wearing this number this year. He's wearing this number. But yeah, with the practices that we did get to see at length, there were a few this year, which was surprising. But the ones that we did get to see, we weren't exactly allowed to report the specifics on.
Okay.
But we were able to just take our observations and then report on them that way, if that makes sense. And
But
so I think
I like, again, like based on what we get, I would take that. Like if they would give us more and just say you can't talk about specifics, but you can give some generalities, I guess. So at least you have things to base, your opinions on.
Right. And that has been helpful. As I mentioned with some of the quarterback stuff, with also now I haven't really talked about Ohio State's defense, which was probably the talk of the program in those final 2 games with Michigan and with Georgia. Those defensive lapses, those explosive plays that they allowed. From everything that we watched, it seemed like, one day the offense had the better of the defense, and then the next day the defense had the better of the offense, kind of trading back and forth. In that whole time, there weren't really a group of players aside from a handful that really were standing out consistently. And that involves the quarterback play with Kyle McCord and with Devin Brown. They made good throws here and there. I don't want to say entirely that they were awful. They weren't. But it wasn't the consistency and the just overall. I mean, just CJ Stroud was so elite with his ball placement, with his accuracy. There was never a question that when he wound up to throw the football that it was getting to his receiver. There were times where you're watching McCord and Brown and you're like, I don't know, like this may get tipped, this may get intercepted. And that's to be expected, right? CJ Stroud was the number 2 overall pick in the draft. We're not throwing those expectations on McCord or Brown. But at the same time, we got to watch a lot of the offense play. Chip Trayanum looked great. Carnell Tate was a name that popped up a ton in spring ball, that just because we got to see him so frequently. Marvin Harrison Jr. was there with his greatness. And the defensive side looked pretty good as well. The defensive line with JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, as I mentioned, and Denzel Burke and Davison and Benson looked really good in the secondary too.
You mentioned the defense, and I did want to ask you about that. Jim Knowles, obviously brought him over from Oklahoma State, and that was supposed to be sort of a big difference maker for Ohio State. And as you well know, it's like you can win against, all the, I was about to say Indiana. They've been at least a little better the last few years, but you know what I'm saying, the Marylands and the Rutgers and whoever else. But everyone's season basically boils down to 2 or 3 games. And you mentioned the games that it came down to. So based on that, was Jim Knowles' first season a success, or where does he stand right now?
That's a great question. It depends on who you talk to. I think that most Ohio State fans would agree that his performance in his first season was a success until it wasn't. The first 11 weeks, Ohio State's defense ranked in the top 10 in almost every measurable category across the FBS. But then in the Michigan game, it all kind of fell apart. And then against Georgia, they looked really good at the beginning, and then it all kind of fell apart. And so I think that when Ohio State gets what they call matchup games, Knowles and his defense needs to be better from start to finish. It's okay. It's fine, as you're mentioning, beating up on Indiana and Maryland and Rutgers. But those games aren't what define Ohio State's season. There's, once every couple of years where those games can cost Ohio State a season. They lose to Purdue every once in a while, or Iowa, Michigan State. But by and large, every season is going to come down to Penn State. It's going to come down to Michigan, and then it'll be in the postseason in the college football playoff. And so I think that you see the pieces. You see what Ohio State did well under Jim Knowles in the first season. They got pressure on the quarterback. Their defensive tackles played extremely well, allowing Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers to shoot gaps and collect a ton of tackles. And their safety play for most of the year, again, was exceptional. Lathan Ransom was a Jim Thorpe Award semifinalist. Josh Proctor started the year in a little bit of a rough spot, but found his way back a little bit. Tanner McAllister was one of probably the most integral pieces of that defense at the nickel safety. So you have a couple of pieces that are moving and shifting now heading into 2023, but still a lot of the same returners. You have Tuimoloau, Sawyer, Eichenberg will be back with still Chambers. Up the middle, Mike Hall, who I know that Notre Dame fans are very familiar with Mike Hall up the middle, and Tyleik Williams next to him, the safeties. We'll see if Sonny Styles can find his way on the field. Lathan Ransom will be back. Jihad Carter, Cam Martinez. There's lots of names with lots of talent. And I think that Jim Knowles, with his system, with the amount of talent that Ohio State has on that defensive side, should continue to increase in I guess what we really see is how will Ohio State fans view it? How will it be viewed on the national perspective? He should continue to increase in popularity in Columbus and in the national scale, but it'll all come down to that game on November 25th at Michigan. We'll see Ohio State probably show up in that top 10, top 25 range, but it doesn't matter if they lose to Michigan. They have to beat Michigan or he'll be seen as, I guess, maybe a failure, but as Ohio State fans may put it harshly, even in the second season.
That's life, I guess, right? Under the spotlight. But I did see that his hybrid linebacker, the jack linebacker, he calls it, that was like, I've read some stuff like that was, is he going to scrap that this year? Is he going to stay with that? Where is he with, I guess that aspect?
He didn't use it very much, if at all, in the spring, from what we saw. That doesn't mean it won't show back up in the fall. I will say that. I know that they have a couple of guys that they may experiment at that position. Mitch Melton was a player that was hurt all of last season with a torn ACL. But before, in spring ball, when Knowles came in, Melton was projecting to be that jack position for Ohio State. Once he went down in the spring game, Knowles threw Jack Sawyer over there. But now Sawyer is firmly a hand in the dirt edge rusher coming as the defensive end. But Melton then is back healthy, so he could slide into that jack spot with Eichenberg and Chambers and even Cody Simon as your three linebackers. They really want to find a way to get CJ Hicks on the field. He was their 5-star linebacker in the 2022 class. The jack position could be an area for him there. Maybe even an experiment if they really want to go crazy with it. Put Sonny Styles there as a guy that gets close to the line of scrimmage. He's huge. He's 6'4". I mean, he's 19 years old, and he looks like he's a 25-year-old, 3-year vet in the NFL. He's that big. He's that athletic. So I think that they'll find ways to give that position some light here in 2023, but it won't be as frequent as it was last year. I just think they're kind of going back to the basics a little bit to maybe give Ohio State's defensive players less to think about, less to make their head spin. Like, just go out and play football. You have the talent. You can go find the results without all this, without all these formations and things to really confuse them.
So we were just talking about with Knowles and the defense, essentially the outcome of the Michigan game and whatever happens at the playoff being the lasting memory, like what people think of you. And Ryan Day, I mean, he's going into year 5 now. I think he's lost 6 games total, but he's lost the last 2 to those guys in maize and blue up north. So, like, is the hot seat talk? Is it real? Like, where are they with Ryan Day right now?
Personally, I don't think that it is. At least not right now. I don't know if you saw it. The Toledo Blade had an interview with Kirk Herbstreit and Jim Tressel over the last couple of days, and Kirk Herbstreit was calling those Ohio State fans that want Ryan Day fired right now part of the 15%. That there's 85% of Ohio State fans that see everything clearly, that he says have a brain, which I found very funny.
Oh boy.
The other 15, it's kind of hot water for him. The other 15% are the ones that are just never happy. The ones that, Ohio State could beat Michigan next year, but then lose in the college football playoff, and those fans would still be upset. They're just looking for a way to be upset.
Yeah.
And I know Ohio State has lost back-to-back games to Michigan. It hasn't happened in a long time. A lot of the fans that may be calling for his job right now are very familiar with the John Cooper era, when losses to Michigan happened almost every year.
Sure.
So I think that that's kind of in the back of people's minds with Ryan Day. But although it just probably isn't a fair assessment of his performance as Ohio State's head coach to just chalk it up to, okay, back-to-back losses to Michigan, you're out. You said it, 45 wins. His win percentage, I believe, although he doesn't qualify under most lists, is the best out of any head coach in college football. 45-6. Like, that's an incredible record. In Columbus, I mean, really, any program in college football would take that kind of production over a 4-year period. But at Ohio State, it comes down to these games, these matchup games. So I do think that the seat would get a little hot if Ohio State loses to Michigan for a third consecutive time. That hasn't happened since the John Cooper era. I believe it was 95, 96, and 97 that they lost 3 in a row. And then you're really talking about, okay, is Ryan Day the guy for this job?
It's hard to imagine that Michigan-Ohio State rivalry being any more intense, but like when you look at how the Buckeyes had dominated that series for the better part of 20 years, but now again they've lost the last 2. Like, has it kind of taken it to a couple, to a different level in terms of what Ohio State kind of thinks of it right now?
Yeah, and as hard as this may be for Ohio State fans to hear, it's not a rivalry if the Buckeyes win every year, right? You have to have something to play for, something to fight for. And I'm not very old. I've seen Ohio State lose to Michigan 4 times in my life. It just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Ohio State has always beaten Michigan. But there's a part of it that eventually it gets to the point where Ohio State beating Michigan just isn't as significant if, for the better part of 2 decades, Ohio State wins all the time. And so what this back-to-back wins for Michigan have done for Ohio State fans, I believe, is remind Ohio State fans of what this rivalry really means and how good it feels to win the rivalry. How good it feels to beat your rival, whether it's at home or on the road, and get to brag about that for another 12 months. And Ohio State fans maybe took for granted what that felt like after having their team win for 20 years. And so now, if Ohio State wins in 2023, you better believe there's going to be some gloating. There's going to be some social media presence from Ohio State fans going all over the Michigan social media accounts and using that as fire and fuel for the rest of 2023 and into 2024.
Real quick, I wanted to ask you, a year from now, USC and UCLA, of course, come into the Big Ten. Like, what's the vibe? Are fans excited about it? Are you excited? But is the media excited to kind of have this newness in the conference? What's the vibe around it right now?
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Ohio State has been very clear in recent years that it's looking for other programs to help it carry water in the Big Ten in terms of these big name schools. Mm-hmm. And what's funny is Michigan is now carrying the water and Ohio State fans don't like it. But Ohio State has always wanted programs beyond Michigan, beyond Penn State, to really be the wow factor of the conference, so that it doesn't have to always carry the burden of being the number 1 team at the top of the totem pole in all sports. That's what their goal is. And I think that they're looking forward to having matchups with a school like USC, with a school like UCLA in football and in basketball, but in also the Olympic sports too. Like USC and UCLA carry great programs from top to bottom. And so I think that everybody here is excited about it and excited about the opportunity to see the Big Ten expand. So I guess I have a question for you. Like, when is Notre Dame coming along? Are we I think that's probably the next school in mind that Ohio State fans have if there ever were going to be expansion again, which
Yeah.
it happened already, so it probably is going to happen soon. Is
Well,
Notre Dame always going to be on this island, or are they going to join a conference sooner or later?
I mean, I think if they have their way, they're going to be on this. But you know, we've been talking about it with all this stuff going on in the ACC this week, and you know, they've got, I think it's 2 more years left on the NBC deal, and I think between, well, you know, they've got their apparel deal that's coming up, and then the TV contract is going to be the big one, and that's, I think that what they get out of that is going to go a long way, and what happens in the ACC ultimately is going to go a long way. Because like we were talking yesterday about what are some other options if the ACC implodes, like would Notre Dame, you know, would they entertain, say, the same kind of arrangement with the Big 12 that they've got with the ACC? And I think that would be favorable. And like, of course, the Big 10 stuff comes up, but looking at it just like from people I've talked to and just bigger picture, I think the only way they get into the Big 10, like the only way the Big 10 wants Notre Dame is if football is included. Don't you? Like, I don't think that the Big 10 is going to entertain the same kind of arrangement that Notre Dame has with the ACC. Do you?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and USC, like you keep going down the list of like, okay, Notre Dame has played all of these schools rather consistently, save for Penn State probably.
Right.
I think the agreement there would almost certainly need football to be involved. That is, if Notre Dame wants a full cut of the media rights that the Big Ten just signed away to NBC and Fox and CBS and all those. I mean, they could maybe make it work, but I don't know if the Big Ten schools want to share a cut of that revenue if they're not going to get the primetime football matchups.
From what I understand, you know, and what makes this new NBC Big Ten primetime deal sort of intriguing as well is maybe you could get some more crossover with Notre Dame and some of these Big Ten schools involved, because then Notre Dame gets to broadcast, or not Notre Dame, NBC gets to broadcast all of them, you know, so like how much that affects some of the non-conference scheduling and stuff like that. But I still think it's going to be tougher for the Big Ten, adding USC and UCLA and just what they're going to do with their, it seems like it's going to be tougher for Notre Dame to get some of the, whether it's the Big Ten or the SEC, to schedule some of these teams, you know, if they do remain independent, just because there's so many, like they're adding conference games right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It seems like the Big Ten, though it maybe won't be this harsh, if it really wanted to, could get to the point where either you join or we're not scheduling you, right? Like we have your USC rivalry.
Put their foot down. Yeah.
We have your old rivalry with Michigan. We have a big time game that you could schedule with Ohio State, but no more. Like we're not going to schedule you. Good luck trying to find games to fill your schedule without these premier teams. So either join us or we're cutting you off. And that could be a possibility. I don't know if the Big Ten will be that harsh, but you never know. Like this is a cutthroat business when it comes up from the top bottom with how much money these media rights deals are starting to be valued at. Notre Dame is a valuable asset to the Big Ten. And especially as the SEC continues to add these premier programs, the Big Ten's going to want to measure up, because they don't want to get left behind, as we're seeing with the ACC and the Pac-12 and the Big 12. All these conferences are doing their best to just stay alive.
I know.
Although the Big Ten is ahead of the other three, it's not where the SEC is compared. So I think that adding Notre Dame would definitely bolster their strength.
Yeah, from what I think what was last reported last fall sometime, the Big Ten does have a Notre Dame provision in that TV contract, like they would be willing to add Notre Dame's. So I just think it's going to come down to whether or not Notre Dame is able to at least get in the ballpark of what the Big Ten and what the SEC are making in that TV revenue in terms of their long-term independence, or whether they do. If they're not, I think the Big Ten is the logical step for them.
Yeah,
So
that's definitely how it seems. I think that they fit the Big Ten mold
yeah.
from an
And
academic
having
standpoint.
USC and UCLA in there, I think makes sense as well. If
You're right.
if Notre Dame is able to keep them, at least keep USC on their schedule, and maybe they replace Stanford with UCLA as an alternate. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah. If there is going to be future expansion and it doesn't involve Notre Dame, I do think that the Big Ten heads in the direction of a Stanford, a Washington. They may, given that there's such a convoluted process getting
I know.
USC or getting UCLA there because of that UC Board of Regents.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have to add Cal Berkeley or one of those other Cal schools. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I think that will be a very big talking point as the Ohio State and Notre Dame game approaches, given
Definitely.
how the rest of this summer is shaping up with all these schools transitioning over to new conferences or pledging or committing their programs to become a part of new conferences in the future.
Absolutely. Chase, I appreciate your time today. Chase Brown from 11warriors.com. You can check out all of his Ohio State writings there and plenty of other stuff on 11warriors.com. Have a great rest of your summer. Thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good. I had my mute button on. Sorry about that. Coming back out of the interview, Chase Brown from 11warriors.com. Great to catch up with him and a lot of good Ohio State insight there. So now we transition to Jesse. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Just golfed a little bit. It's a beautiful day out here in Cleveland. So yeah, I'm happy I got in here right at the right time. It's rapid fire time from my understanding.
It is. Are you ready for rapid fire?
I am.
Well, let's just do it. We got all kinds of people stirred up in chat right now. I saw we had an Ohio State visitor kind of chiming in and they mixing it up, going back and forth. It looked like at least pleasant talk going back and forth. There he is. He's in there. Billy Tuesday, the Ohio State Buck. You can see his Buckeye logo there. Well, let's just jump into some rapid fire. We've got 100 days to go until Notre Dame football opens the season in Dublin, Ireland against Navy. So what gets you the most excited when you're thinking about this new season for the Fighting Irish with 100 days to go?
So what's got me the most amped up and excited right now would be this kind of revamped, renewed, re-innovated offense that the Irish have pieced together over the offseason. We've talked about it a lot. The addition of an offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, new offensive line coach, in combination with a young wide receiver room, a grad transfer quarterback, a really good running back room. So yeah, just seeing how all of that comes together and hoping that they can be a high octane offense and compete with, the USCs, the Clemsons, the Ohio States. I think that's what's got me most excited for the season. And then second, what kind of goes along with that is, to me, this is a Marcus Freeman kind of led team. He's kind of flushed out a lot of the coaches and players that he was, kind of, I guess, grandfathered into when he took over the program.
He inherited, yeah.
Yeah, he inherited. So to me, it just feels like truly we are embarking on the Marcus Freeman era. And I'm really anxious to see, what that Marcus Freeman era looks like, because to me last year, did I want Notre Dame to do well? Sure. But I was content with it being Marcus Freeman's first year, it not being, an entire staff and roster built by him. But I think Marcus Freeman is really going to be defined over this year. And then ultimately the years 2, 3, and 4, I think are going to be Marcus Freeman's biggest years. So this first year going into a more Marcus Freeman-esque era is another thing that I'm really excited for.
Good point, because he does tend to get kind of a free pass for things that happened last year, for the most part anyway. I don't think that there is near probably the same level of scrutiny on him compared to, say Brian Kelly in his first couple of years. But
yeah, but I do think that there will be added pressure next year. I think there will be more people upset and alarmed if you
right.
have games like Marshall
Yeah.
and Stanford again.
The free pass only goes so far. Yeah, and I'll address kind of some of that coming up here in a second. But I'll just piggyback on yours because that's like it is the offense that I'm excited to see. This new offense in action. I mean, having the best passing quarterback Notre Dame has had in at least like the last 15 years since Clausen. Just thinking about how those Sam Hartman, Jaden Thomas, and Jaden Greathouse connections were in less than a half in a cold, rainy spring game. That's kind of got me percolating and the anticipation for what more can come because he didn't have Chris Tyree and Tobias Merriweather to throw to in that game. And like you combine them with those two receivers right there alone, and you mix in the running game like you're talking about, a running game that Hartman never had out there at Wake Forest. It's just been so frustrating over, for so many years to see all these other offenses around college football be able to thrive and just go about the way they do things so differently than the way Notre Dame has operated offensively for so long. Like I want to see Notre Dame be an actual, like an innovative, and it doesn't even have to be truly innovative, just a functional downfield type offense. And I think that we can see that this year with a guy like Hartman being the trigger man. I mean, he's like the Game Boy, like we were talking the EA Sports college football yesterday. He's gay. He can be the Game Boy for this whole thing. Like it maybe some video game like stuff, some actual fun offense to finally get to see. So I'm really excited for that. We've got 100 days. We shall see. So the flip side of that, is there a biggest concern that you have at the 100-day mark of the season?
The biggest concern I have, that's a tough one because I feel pretty solid. Like looking at it offensively, I feel like the running back room is in good hands. I feel like the offensive line is in good hands. I guess the thing that I'm most worried about, most concerned about, and again, looking at the defense, I don't have a lot of concerns because I feel like they're getting better at linebacker. They're a solid secondary. They've made improvements and added depth along the defensive line. So to me, the biggest concern is, can the wide receivers step up and do what they're supposed to?
Are they really going to be what we think they can be?
I think that is my biggest concern because there's so much inexperience. There's not guys out there who are proven, catch guys, yard guys, touchdown guys. There's just so much inexperience with Tobias Merriweather, Chris Tyree, obviously playing running back his whole career, the trio of young wide receivers. Like there's just no one that is like, this is going to be the guy, right? There's no proven actual wide receivers. And then I think another one is a concern that came to light last year is just depth at the quarterback position. Knock on wood, you never want anything bad to happen, but if Sam Hartman goes down, that would be very tragic for this team. It's like you don't even want to say it out loud almost.
Yes, it would. Yeah, and that's Joe agrees with you, and I hadn't really thought about that, but I mean that's probably, like even Ohio State would be in that situation. We just got done talking about Ohio State. I think there's a lot of teams that would be in that situation. You're most likely going to have to go to an unproven guy if something happens to your number one guy. It's up to your coaches to get those guys ready to go, but there would be a drop off if you go from Sam Hartman down to Steve Angeli or even Kenny Menchie because of the huge gap in experience. And like I think that's a legit concern. Most of my on-field concerns, like the biggest one that I had was what was going to happen at safety. I think they've addressed that, getting Antonio Carter last week. My thing, not a concern as much. It's not a concern. It is just, I guess it's a bigger picture question of, are the blips of losing to the teams that you're supposed to beat, is that a thing of the past? Like Brian Kelly had Navy, Tulsa, South Florida in his first couple of years before he turned the corner. And then 2017 to 2021, things got smoothed out. They beat the teams. They beat all the teams they were supposed to beat. Didn't always beat the teams that were sort of ranked evenly with them or maybe a little bit ahead of them. But it's can you continue to, or can, for Marcus Freeman specifically, can he put like the Marshall Stanford type stuff behind? And like Michael is saying, Notre Dame fans need to end everything about losing those kind of games to Marshall and Stanford last year, exaggerating expectations that Marcus Freeman is going to lose to bad teams. Yet Brian Kelly has as well. And he's still just a second-year head coach. So that's, again, not as much a concern, but it is a question. Are those blips going to be a thing of the past? And going back to what we were talking about, to, like most excited, Joe was talking about the culture change. And I think that goes along the lines of what you were talking about.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to hint at.
Marcus Freeman's team right now. Yeah.
What he's building, not what he's building with or building off of, what Marcus Freeman is building from the ground up on his own, how he wants this program to look, how it is going to run in the future, et cetera, et cetera. I think that is the most exciting thing, because I think Marcus Freeman can really turn Notre Dame into that program that we've seen in the past, that we got accustomed to, in the 80s, 90s, et cetera. I think he can bring that back. And not to say that Notre Dame wasn't there. I just don't think that they were in that top tier of teams, the last 2 decades or so. So, I really think Marcus Freeman has a tremendous opportunity on his hands. And I think that is the most exciting part to see. Obviously, I want it to go well, but we can only wait and see if, how it's going to go.
Irish Gordian Knot says, would you rather bet on Sam Hartman to get 4,000 yards, Tobias Merriweather getting 750 yards, or Merriweather getting 1,000 yards? I don't know. Was this a lucky lefty conversation? I think I missed the first part of this. He said Malik kept moving the goalpost, if that's what they were talking about today. Which of those would you be most willing to bet on?
Tobias at 750.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd hedge toward, I realize 4,000 yards is a lot, but I would hedge toward Hartman getting the 4,000, because with the receiving group that they've got, and again, like you were just talking about, as inexperienced as it is, that's, as We're Not Marshall says, the kid has one career catch and now you're expecting 1,000 yards. And you said 750. I don't know if it's going to be him. Is it going to be Jaden Thomas? I would think one of those guys is going to get that. I would be more in the
4,000 is about, if you're assuming 13 games for a bowl game, fourth at least, right? Because maybe they make the playoffs and get to 14 games. But 4,000 yards at a minimum of 13 games comes out to about 300 yards per game. That's not unattainable.
Right. No, and that's why I would bet on the 4,000, because, I mean, think about what their schedule looks like with, throw out Ohio State and USC and Clemson, and, just push those games aside, and you've got 9 games remaining where you would expect that they should be able to get the backups in quite a bit with the kind of offense that we think that they're going to have, and with the kind of defense that I think that they're capable of playing. So, and again, the ability to lean on the rushing game doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to, that it's going to take away from his passing yards, because look at Caleb Williams last year. We used him as an example before. He was up there over that mark, and USC still had a solid running game, and it wasn't even a great running game. So I think with the kind of backs and offensive line that Notre Dame has, you can have both, that you can have a quarterback who should easily, especially when he's got the experience that Hartman has, he can easily be up there around 4,000 yards. I think that the ball is going to be spread around a bit. I would definitely not push it toward 1,000 yards for any of the receivers, but I definitely think that you can have probably 3 guys who are at least 650 and above this season in terms of wide receivers.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a good point there. Something that's going to help Sam Hartman's game is the run game, but like you said, it's not going to take away from his passing attempts. It's just only I think it's going to make his passing easier, because they're going to have to respect the run game and commit some guys to the box here and there. And I think that, linebackers having to honor a run game and at least take a step and look at it, I mean, that just gives Hartman a little bit more time and the ability to kind of, probably get more man-on-man coverage, considering, more guys have to be committed to the box, to the run game. So I think both of those things it's Jason Garrett hit it on the head
Are you
a
going
lot.
to give Jason Garrett some credit?
Yeah, he hit it on the head a lot when he did Notre Dame games. That run game is what opens up their pass game ultimately, and that's what's going to get everything kind of churning. Is the run game allows you start off with a run game, physical run game. It opens up your pass game. I think you become more pass dominant towards the middle part of the game, and then as you're coming down off it's like a parabola loop. You get to the run game up here, you ride out that pass game, and then you kind of come back down with the run game to end the game. And that's kind of how I see their plan of attack going majority of the season.
Parabola loop, as you motion up in an arc. You are literally talking above my head with the parabola loop. But I think I agree with the gist of what you're saying. And Michael says if Drew Pine wasn't the quarterback last year, the receivers they had would have performed last year. And it's bingo. And that's why with a legit quarterback, all these guys can perform. And Gideon Nutt said Garrett did not hit it on the head during a lot of Notre Dame.
I thought he did well in Notre Dame games, actually.
I feel like his X's and O's were pretty good. I don't want to hear about game strategy from Jason Garrett. His X's and O's were solid. Was it the most entertaining broadcast?
Yeah, knowledge of the
Probably
game
not.
was there, but like the entertainment aspect of it was not there at times.
Right. Exactly.
No, I actually hated him as a Cowboys fan. It's the complete opposite.
Yeah, please don't even go there, Gordian. Not. It is not because no. And I mean, this is closer to true. He's a robot. Yeah, I mean that I wouldn't.
Robots know their stuff, though.
That's right. Robots. Again, like XO, like strategy gets more to emotion, right? Like game situations where X and O.
Schemes.
Yeah, he's actually a good offensive mind, but we'll push the Garrett talk aside. Let's talk more Sam Hartman and other quarterbacks, because we talked yesterday about that ridiculous ESPN quarterback tier article that has Hartman in tier 4 with more than 20 quarterbacks ranked ahead of him in their ranking. My question is, which quarterbacks would you actually want instead of Hartman right now if you had your choice? And I'm talking about quarterbacks who will be playing in the FBS this season. Which quarterbacks would you actually want instead of Hartman? For me, it comes down to one guy. I don't know about you.
There's two guys I would take over Sam Hartman. One would be Caleb Williams. Two would be Drake May. And then you start looking at some of the other names. Michael Penix Jr., I wouldn't want him. He's also a fifth-year senior, so it's not like you're getting any younger. I would take Sam Hartman's experience and the ability to throw the ball over that. I think that playing in the ACC is a little bit tougher than playing in the Pac-12. Again, Bo Nix, I wouldn't take over him, another fifth-year senior, older guy. I think that Sam Hartman has the better experience. Then you start looking at some other names like Jordan Travis. I'm not in on his hype. He hasn't proven anything really to me. And then you look at Cam Rising as well, another older guy, another quarterback out in the Pac-12. It's crazy. You look at a lot of these lists, and there's like 4 quarterbacks from the Pac-12 all in the top list. And I'm not buying any of them except Caleb Williams. And again, I just think Pac-12 defenses aren't as battle-tested and as hard as some of these defenses over in the ACC. And I'll take Sam Hartman's experience in the ACC over the Pac-12 experience quarterbacks. Yeah. So the only reason I go with Caleb Williams and Drake May is because they're younger. And they'll probably they won't even probably stick out their all 4 years in college. So even then it's not really that big of a deal. So those are my two guys at the end of the day.
I mean, they're both supposed to go at the top of the draft next year. And a lot of people saying they would have taken them this year if they were draft eligible. It would only be Caleb Williams for me. I mean, you can call it a push with Drake May. I wouldn't take him over Hartman. They had a head-to-head game last year. North Carolina won by 2 points, and you can argue that maybe they should have won by more, just based on, like, if you look at recruiting rankings alone, North Carolina has outpaced Wake Forest. Pretty much all these other schools and quarterbacks that you've talked about, whether it's Penix or Nix or Travis, like all the places they've been at, the recruiting rankings for pure offensive talent have been ahead of what Wake Forest has had. Like look at Josh Downs at North Carolina. He was a 3rd-round pick last year. Hartman's best receiver that he had last year had over 1,000 yards. He didn't go until the 6th round. So, like, I just, like if you boil it down to numbers, they're all fairly similar. Some are ahead of Sam Hartman, but when you look at what he has done with less at Wake Forest, I just, Caleb Williams would be the only one I would definitively say I would take ahead of Sam Hartman. Again, there's some that would be pushes, but like look at, like he's going to have a running game to lean on for the first time, kind of like Cam Rising out at Utah. Like if you look at what Rising has done, like he's maybe one of the few, again, like Rising and Nix or Penix when he was at Indiana. Penix at Washington is another story. But again, like when you look at what they've had around them, Rising hasn't had necessarily anymore, but they've had a better offensive line, better offensive system, better running game, and that's what Hartman's going to have now. So that's why Williams would be the only one that I would put ahead of him. Even with Drake May, because like look at Sam Howell. Like Sam Howell played in the same system, and he was supposed to be so great. What's he done? So I wouldn't take him above Hartman. So the ACC appears to be nearing a new agreement on revenue distribution that would give a larger share of postseason revenue, including from the soon-to-expand college football playoff, to the teams that play in the postseason games, rather than dividing all the revenue equally among conference members, which they do now. Do you buy or sell this idea for the ACC to try to kind of appease the masses out there that have been uprising?
Yeah, I believe in distributing the revenue across the teams equally. And I'll tell you why, because, not every team is going to be great. Like this decade, sure, Clemson might dominate and North Carolina State might be bad. But who's to say the decade after this that North Carolina State isn't the team that, kind of takes that next step up and Clemson takes a step back? So it's easy to say in the moment as a school that, yes, we want all the money that we're generating, but you're looking at it in just this kind of smaller window. So for me, I think it could hurt you in the long term. And I think it's just better as a conference to be kind of unified. So I would be on the same boat of distributing the revenue equally. I don't know about you.
So you want them to keep the even revenue split like they have right now?
Yeah, I do. And I think it also fluctuates because, obviously football is your big sport and obviously the biggest moneymaker. But, just because Clemson's good at football doesn't mean they're good at baseball, basketball. Like there's so many sports across the whole entire college. I think it's so easy to get hyper fixated on one sport in the moment now, rather than considering, long-term down the road in the bigger picture of all the sports kind of equally.
And it would be a revenue split of not just football, but it would be like, men's and women's basketball. If your team goes to the tournament, there's extra revenue that comes along with it there. And that's why I like it, because the original idea was like Clemson, Florida State, and these other schools went in, kind of into these meetings saying we're the ones who are producing the most, right? And, the other 5 schools along with them, like North Carolina, NC State, et cetera, they're like, we think that we're more deserving of a better split right now, and you should give us more and forget everybody else. I think it's kind of a compromise and a good one to say, if you go to the playoff, if you go to March Madness, if you go to the College World Series, whatever it happens to be, then yeah, you can have more revenue as a result.
I like that kind of idea is, regular season is like a base and that kind of gets redistributed evenly, but the incentives of making it past the regular season, I do think that particular, sport and team should reap the benefits of it because they went above and beyond. It's out of kind of like that base or core of the regular season.
Yeah, it's like if
Like
you know if
contract incentives, basically, that
yeah,
professional athletes get.
if you're a salesman, you're going to make more. The more you sell, the more you're going to make, right? And it's really the same thing. It's exactly what you said. It is incentive. So like the base TV revenue would be the same, but if Clemson goes to the college football playoff and none of the other ACC teams do, then Clemson gets the college football playoff revenue. It's not going to be split with the rest of the conference. Again, like same with March Madness and whatever else. And it's obviously on a year-to-year basis. So kind of, like the baseline stays the same with the basic TV revenue, but you're essentially getting postseason bonuses if your teams make it to the games that count. So I like it. I think it's the best compromise that the ACC is probably going to be able to come up with right now. All right, so SI's Ross Dellinger reported this week that if the Big 12 can't get the Pac-12 teams it's been pursuing to join the conference, UConn is next on the Big 12's wish list. Do you buy or sell UConn potentially to the Big 12?
I don't. I sell UConn going to the Big 12. And the reason why I sell them is literally outside of basketball. It's the only, basketball is the only fit it makes in the Big 12. And I think it'd be a great addition there. But I mean, if you're looking at football, baseball, all the other kind of sports that come along with it, UConn can't contend. Like UConn football almost got shut down, if I'm right, not too long ago. And so I just don't think that they could handle their own outside of basketball inside the Big 12. I think that is literally the only reason why that there's even interest, because of the recent national championship. And then obviously, the women's success over however long it's been, that Gino's been there. So yeah. I just sell it because basketball is the only selling point. And that's like November to March. So like 4 or 5 months out of the season. It's not enough for me.
I said this a couple years ago, like UConn just needs to move, football needs to move back to FCS. Like they gave it a shot in the American Conference. All it got them was 11 straight losing seasons and an upside down athletic department budget that's put them tens of millions of dollars in debt. They have tried, not even big time football. Again, it's the American. There's some solid football in the American, but it's, like they move back to the Big East. As you said, like they just showed that they could win a men's national championship. Women's basketball is obviously still successful there. And it's like, Storrs is an outpost in Connecticut. It is literally like you've got to drive from Storrs, probably close to an hour to get to the airport in Hartford, and just all this other, like to get from there, like to Lubbock, Texas, or even Waco, or, any of these places. Lawrence, Kansas State, like why would you be considering that? Stay in the Big East, be a basketball school,
just dominate in the Big East as the big fish in the smaller pond. I just think going to the Big 12, they would drown. They would drown outside of women's and men's basketball, and I don't think that those two programs could keep them afloat as a school as whole. Essentially, for basketball only, it would be a great move to the Big 12. But to try to compete in football, I just don't see it. I see it driving them backwards once again and costing them more money ultimately than what they would be able to get out of it. I just don't see it. So the NFL's director of broadcasting, Mike North, was on the SI Media podcast this week, and he told the host, Jimmy Traina, when Traina asked him why the Aaron Rodgers-less Green Bay Packers are going to have 5 primetime games this season. North said it's in part due to the Packers having a track record of turning inexperienced quarterbacks into winners. What do you think of that? So I understand the argument and I understand the logic, because I mean, we're talking about the most blessed quarterback franchise in the last 3 decades with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. And I know, Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers probably weren't the most coveted. Like you didn't look at both of those guys and say, yes, Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champions, all the accolades that they ended up compiling over their time. I just don't see Jordan Love following that lineage. And I don't know if that's too skeptical of me, too early on of me, but I just don't see it as something that's going to happen. And I think the only thing that really keeps them in there is that it's the Packers. They're one of those kind of legacy teams.
Right.
And I just believe that there is still enough national fans, whether or not they have a good quarterback or not, a proven quarterback or not, they're still going to draw interest. And so while I understand the logic to a degree, I just think that in the end, Jordan Love isn't going to follow in the footsteps as Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. So I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say that that is your main reason for putting them in those prime spots.
Well, and it wasn't necessarily the main reason, but it was one of the reasons that he had. And, again, he's saying they've got a track record of doing this. I mean, it's a track record of one, because like you said, it's like, Brett Favre was traded from Atlanta to Green Bay. That was like that's a distant memory. Like what, at least 4 head coaches ago at this point. And to go from, him turning into what he turned into. I remember in college is when that trade happened from Atlanta to Green Bay. And it's like, who, one of my roommates and best friends at the time, huge Green Bay Packers fan, and he was skeptical of that. He was skeptical of the Aaron Rodgers deal, but there's only been one transition from Favre to Rodgers. And yeah, that worked out well. But again, like that was a different administration. That was a different coaching staff ago. Like if it were me, again, just like you said, I would have, because the Packers are there because they're the Packers and they do have a national following, but they've also been blessed with 3 decades, 31 years of Rodgers and Favre. Maybe Love does turn into that. Like he's got all of, I think, 50 pass attempts in his career right now. There's nothing to show that he is. I think I would have front loaded that primetime schedule with maybe, 3 games early on. But if they get to the middle of the season and the Packers and Jordan Love are floundering, who's going to tune in to that? They're just going to be stinkers. So I think it was an interesting rationale, to say the least, to say that's part of the reason that they're going with Green Bay. 5 primetime games this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's either going to go really well or kind of be the Packers' public display of not being good after being, pretty good the last 3 decades.
Yeah, that's right. And, we've got some discussion going on, like Chi-Town saying Favre and Rodgers are not the normal in the 70s and 80s for the Packers. There was a lot of bad quarterback play after Bart Starr. That's exactly right. And, Roger Dodger says Montana to Young for the Niners, but that was messy. It was. And that is like, those are really the only 2 handoffs that where you went from one Hall of Famer to another. Like there have not been, it's pretty much the fact that the Green Bay Packers got 30 years of Hall of Fame quarterback play is just astounding. No one has ever done that before. Like the closest thing is Tom Brady in New England, and he did that all himself. Like when you're talking about that, length of time of Hall of Fame quarterback play, but there's never been a handoff like that before. It's
give me your way too early NFC North standings.
Oh man, see, there's just.
I'll give you mine. I'll give you a little second. I got
Lions,
Vikings, Packers, Bears.
That would probably be the direction that I would go, because I just don't know what that Bears defense is going to be like, and like Justin Fields, like so many times last year, like he really didn't throw that much. I think he threw the least of any team or, like any quarterback in terms of attempts. Even when they were trailing as much as they trailed, he didn't throw
I think there were games where he barely threw it 10 times.
Yeah.
Like 15 was his maximum, very maximum sometimes.
Right. They didn't even air it out when they were trailing. He would still be running the football. So I just don't know if I can buy completely into the Lions hype or not.
Yeah, but the Lions handled the Vikings last year, even towards the end when the Vikings were hot and, whatever they were, the Lions, they beat them. And that's why I think that I like the Lions momentum going into next season. I don't think the Vikings can sustain that record they did last year. And I mean, they kind of proved it in the first round of the playoffs, right?
Yeah, I would probably go Lions, Vikings.
Packers and Bears are going to be
Those
like
other
one
two.
game difference, in my opinion. I think they're both
Right.
going to kind of be there.
They'll probably split with each other, and both will be sub 500. You know, there's a reason the Bears got the number 1 overall pick. I'm not expecting them to make a move this year. You know, beyond just Lovie Smith handing it.
Yeah,
to
the
them.
number 1 pick isn't going to, fix that entire roster.
Right. So it's going to be Dion and Colorado against TCU in Fox's first big noon kickoff game of the season, September 2nd. Scale of 1 to 10. How much does it move the needle for you?
Oof. It's like a 2 for me. 10 being the highest, like the needle going, the speedometer going, maxing out. I got to go a 2 out of 10. And the only reason it's a 2 is because I could give a crap about TCU. I want to see what that
everyone wants to see what Colorado's going to do.
Yeah, I want to see what Dion puts on the field. And if they're a competent football team, really, that's all I'm looking for.
John puts it at a 1. I put it at least at a 5. You know, again, like just because of the Dion stuff, can they, after all these transfers and all this, waves that he made coming in the door, can they be competitive? I'm not sold that TCU, by the way, is going to continue to be anywhere nearly as good as they were.
Yeah, there's no way. I think they're actually going to be like a sub 500 team this year.
Ooh, you think they'll fall that far back? Well, then
I think they'll be like 7-5.
If you think that, it could be competitive then.
Colorado, no, that game's going to be competitive. I don't think that game's not going to be a blowout, in my opinion. I think that actually Colorado will have more athleticism on the field than TCU, but I just don't know what they're going to look like as a team game 1.
Yeah. Chi-Town says Colorado's going to get blown out. I'd like to see what the line is right now. We'll see if I can find it here in a second, because
I don't know where you find all these lines at.
What? They're in your app. All you got to do is go to your app. They're in there. You just got to look for the futures. So Colorado currently has a Vegas over-under win total of 3.5. Falcons win total is 8.5. The Bears, the Chicago Bears, are 7.5. So which of those 3 teams' win total is more likely to go over this season?
Shoot. So we're talking, AFC South. Tampa's going to be gross. Panthers are going to be rebuilding. And then what's the last team in that AFC South? The Saints.
Saints, yeah.
Saints are nothing, crazy.
But what are the Falcons?
That's what I mean. You look at the over 8.5. That means you're a 9-8 team at minimum. I don't really buy that from the Falcons. You go look at the Bears. The Bears, that's like an 8-9 team. I think they could finish right around there. I think they could be 8-9, 7-10, somewhere around there. Dion at over 3.5. That means you're going 4-8. Just because of the parity in college football, I think I feel most confident about Dion going over 3.5 wins. I just think that the guy, I know he's a lot, and I know, but he's got a track record, and I know it's not in the Power 5, but he's upgrading his roster as he's moving along, and he's never shown to me that he's going to be a guy that doesn't exceed expectations. He's always exceeded expectations in everything that he's done, whether he comes off as arrogant, he comes off as cocky, loudmouth, whatever you want to say about Dion, is he exceeds your expectations. The guy was a professional 2-sport athlete. He just did everything that he basically was told he couldn't do. And so I have the most faith in the Colorado Buffs to go over 3.5 wins, because I think Dion's a winner and he'll do what it takes to get that program turned around.
First of all, the Atlanta Falcons are not winning 9 games.
That was a stretch. I mean, Desmond Ridder and Bijan Robinson are leading the backfield. So that's a sophomore and a freshman coming in.
And that's my point. Like, okay, you can add Bijan Robinson, and the fact that was their pick, considering all the holes they have. They don't have a quarterback. I don't care how bad that division is. They're not winning 9 games this season. Maybe they get to 8. Maybe. I think that's
You're telling me sports gambling Calvin Ridley isn't going to move the needle for you either?
No. The Bears are not winning 8 games. Sorry, Chi-Town. The Bears are not winning 8 games this season.
That's what I mean. So by de facto, I have the most faith in
Right.
Colorado and what Dion is, and the fact that it's still college football. Like there's so much parity, things can happen.
Yeah, the South is a trash division, but hate to do this to you. The North is not going to be that much better. You know, they do have the Lions and the Vikings, and it's like if that's the step up, then oh my goodness. But
Kenny
by the
Moore
way,
found your lines for you, 23.5 on DraftKings.
I was just getting ready to say that. I was waiting for you to finish. Colorado is a 23.5 point underdog to TCU.
I might take that right now.
Yeah.
Lock me in for a future.
I think that I would take that as well. I do like the over 4 wins, though, for Colorado this season. I mean, or 3.5. It might only be 4. It might only be 5. But I you know, it's still the Pac-12, and the roster is going to be completely different than what Colorado had last year. So you can't base it on the 1-win team that they had last year. You know, he's completely overhauled the roster. So
He'll get him right in fall camp. It'll be
Yeah.
a tough fall camp for Colorado, but I think he'll get him right.
All right. K-Mac's heading out, and we're getting ready to wrap up as well. So appreciate you joining us here today. We had a lot to cover, a lot of good stuff that we had on today's show.
I know what I'm doing immediately after this show. I'm taking them to cover 23.5, and I'm taking the over in the 3.5. I might parlay those if it's possible.
I was going to say, I would jump on that right now. I think that line has got to come down before it gets there. You get like,
we are not Marshall. I'm sorry you live in Atlanta. I was down there a month ago, and that is the worst traffic and airport I think I've ever experienced in my life.
Yes, very large airport, that's for sure. All right, well, smash the like button on your way out. We appreciate you being here as always. I think, Vince, you're here tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I'm here tomorrow.
All right, I think Vince is with us as well. So either way, we will talk to you then. Hit the like button, subscribe, rate, and review, and talk to you tomorrow. Thanks to Chase Brown, IB Nation Sports Talk.